Saving $1 million for retirement is no easy feat, but the reality is a 7-figure nest egg does not go as far as it used to. Still, there's a number of different factors that will determine how long that money will last in your retirement, including your withdrawal strategy, how your money is invested, and how you approach a tax strategy in retirement to minimize your taxes and keep more of that money in your pocket. So in this video, we'll go through a few different scenarios to give you an idea of just how long $1 million might last in retirement, as well as how making a few small tweaks and changes to your plan can have a big impact and help you get the most out of your retirement savings. Before we get started, if we haven't met, my name is Jake Skellhorn. I'm a certified financial planner and the co-founder of Spark Wealth Advisors, where my partner Chris and I help people just like you retire with confidence and clarity. So the best way to visualize how long $1 million might last is to use our financial planning software and run some simulations. So here we have our client Andy, obviously not a real client, not a real name, but just for the purposes of this video, we'll use a typical client profile that we work with here. So Andy is age 60. He plans to retire this year. Little overview of his financial situation here. Has about $25,000 in the bank, about $700,000 in a pre-tax 401k plan, $100,000 in his Roth 401k, and about $200,000 in a brokerage account. He currently has his primary residence, which is worth about $550,000. with a small mortgage left on it that he has a few more years until it's fully paid off. But again, wants to retire today. With Andy's goals, he wants to spend about $4,000 per month. So we've got that in here as what he would like to spend just on discretionary expenses. We're going to assume that increases each year with inflation, of course. And then we also have a separate budget for just healthcare expenses. So because of Andy's income that we'll go into in just a moment and his expected retirement income, he will only pay about $300 a month or so for pre-Medicare health insurance through the marketplace. There's a great tool that I use. I can show you a glimpse of now that shows you what your expected premium tax credit would be if you were to get a marketplace health insurance plan. So because that is based off of your modified adjusted gross income and Andy's withdrawals from his pre-tax accounts are going to be pretty low, we expect that he would only really pay about $223 a month out of pocket. But we played it safe and rounded that up to $300, excuse me. And then we also have about the same cost for Medicare Part D once he goes on Medicare at age 65. So again, separately budgeted for that. I'll include a link for that calculator in the description below this video as well. And then for the end of life care, we always budget about $68,000 per year for the last 2 years for in-home care, because most people at some point will need some sort of long-term care. So it's always important to budget for that as well. But that's an overview of Andy's situation. Just to clarify one other thing, Andy's retirement expenses that he wants to have each month or spend each month does not include his home maintenance. So we factored that in separately as well. He's got property taxes, insurance, and maintenance that will be sort of a fixed cost. So once again, the $4,000 is just what he wants to spend on kind of discretionary expenses in retirement. And lastly, Andy will have a Social Security benefit here. We're going to assume that that is $2,500 per month starting at full retirement age. If he decides to claim it sooner, obviously that will be reduced. And if he delays it past 67, that'll be increased. But this is his current salary and sort of his current savings, but that will stop, this year since he's retiring. So let's take a look at Andy's retirement projections and see, just how long that $1 million that he has will last. So this is a Monte Carlo simulation. For those that are not familiar, it's essentially taking all the inputs that we just looked at and projecting out what Andy's retirement accounts could do over the next 30 years or so. We plan for him to live until age 92. Basically, out of the 1,000 different scenarios, only 34% of them result in him reaching the end of his life without running out of money. Obviously not a very strong, confidence-inspiring number. So this is where we can start to make some changes for Andy to increase that outcome. For this video, I really wanted to show you sort of how long it lasts by looking at the projections here. So on the left here, we have today. So that's his current balance there, $1 million. As time goes on, obviously, we don't know exactly what the stock market will do, what bonds will do, what inflation will do. So this is where all the simulations are kind of compiled and put into a different range. So the light blue area there means that out of all the simulations, 95% of them will fall within these two bands. And then 5% of them will be somewhere out here. So pretty safe assumption that he'll be somewhere within these within this light blue shaded area. And then the same thing for the darker blue. 75% of this scenarios are within these two, and then 25% are on the outside. But the number that we like to look at is the median, right? So that's basically 50% of scenarios are above that, 50% of scenarios are below that. Not overly optimistic or pessimistic, but Nonetheless, based on Andy's current plan, the median scenario results in him running out of money at about age 90. So obviously, when you reach your final years, that's not something you want to have the possibility of. And then some of these scenarios even result in him running out of money at age 79 or 80. So obviously, some changes need to be made, some adjustments need to be made to increase the longevity of this money, make sure it lasts longer for Andy. So again, the couple things that make the biggest impact on what I want to focus on this video. Number one would be the spending strategy. So a lot of softwares assume, a lot of people assume that they're just going to increase their expenses with inflation each year, when a lot of studies have shown that that's simply not how retirees actually spend money. Over time, you'll actually generally spend less money on an inflation adjusted basis. So, people like to spend a lot of money in the early years, but then as they settle in, that spending starts to slow down and it might pick back up again towards the end of your life with healthcare expenses. But this is known as what's called the retirement spending smile. If you look at it on a graph, it looks like a smile. So that's the first thing we're going to implement here. So what the retirement spending smile assumes is that instead of adjusting your expenses exactly by inflation each year, you'll just subtract that by 1%. So let's say Andy retires and next year's inflation numbers come out at 4%. Well, instead of increasing his withdrawals by 4%, we'll just increase them by 3%. So obviously that's going to have a good impact on the success of his plan. So that alone will, in the median scenario, give Andy a good shot of not running out of money. But again, we can still see some of the scenarios here at the bottom where he runs out at age 83 or so. But that's the first thing we always like to look at, was adjust that spending strategy. Again, that can have a pretty big impact. Another benefit of using the retirement spending smile, which again just assumes that you don't quite increase your withdrawals as much as inflation each year, is that all else equal, it generally allows you to spend more of your money upfront in retirement. So for example, if we increased Andy's spending to $4,500, that would put him at about the same place as he was to begin with. So a lot of people obviously would prefer to spend that money upfront, especially if you know that you're probably not going to spend it later on when you settle in and become less mobile, things like that. So we'll set this back to 4,000 right now, but just wanted to show you that all else equal, if you assume that you're not going to increase your withdrawals as much as inflation each year, then it allows you to spend more upfront generally. So that's number one. Number two was Andy's sort of investment allocation. So he's currently pretty conservative when it comes to his overall allocation. He's less than 50-50 between stocks and bonds. So, that's pretty in line with how a lot of retirees want to be in retirement. You want to take less risk, you want it to be stable because you're starting to rely on that money for income. But the truth is, inflation is still a risk that you need to address, and stocks are going to be the part of your portfolio that give you the best option or the best shot at outpacing inflation. So for someone in Andy's situation, I would generally start a conversation about how many years of your expenses would make you comfortable to have in those safer assets like cash and bonds. And then the rest of it generally should be invested in equities or stocks that will outpace inflation over very long periods of time. So just as an example, if we took about 5 years worth of Andy's expenses, that would come out to about 30% of his portfolio in bonds. So if the stock market does take a downturn at any point during his retirement, he can rely on those safer assets like cash and bonds for his income while the stocks recover. No need to sell those at a low. So a 70-30 portfolio is definitely going to provide a better outcome for him in this situation. So we can take a look to see just what impact a more growth-oriented portfolio has for Andy's success of his plan here. So obviously that's going to increase the numbers, but to see just how long that money lasts, obviously our median scenario here, he is doing just fine. Still a slight possibility that he could run out of money at 84, but overall, most scenarios are showing him having enough money to last the rest of his life now. The one last thing I wanted to tweak to his plan was the tax strategy. So the default tax strategy that a lot of people use in retirement would be this column here. So for your withdrawals, most people would take a little bit out of each of their accounts. So most of it out of that pre-tax bucket where he has most of his money, some out of Roth and then some out of his brokerage account. But for Andy's situation, it's going to benefit him quite a bit to take his withdrawals in a certain sequence. So take all of his income needs from that brokerage account first, let those tax deferred and tax-free accounts like his 401k and Roth 401k continue to grow since those are not taxed while the money's in the account. In addition to that, if he has any room left in the 10% tax bracket after taking money out for his income from that brokerage account, he can do Roth conversions, and that's going to save him a total of about $208,000 expected over his lifetime. So that'll have a nice little impact on his plan as well. But most of all, allow him to keep more of that money in his pocket instead of paying that to Uncle Sam. So that'll be sort of the last thing that I typically recommend to get these numbers in a place where, we're more comfortable letting Andy retire. So back to this chart here, you can see that in the median scenario, Andy has a little over $1.1 million left at the end of his life. So now not only are Andy's projections looking a lot better where he's not going to run out of money, but he may actually end up reaching his later years with regret that he didn't spend more money in his earlier years. So in the median scenario here, obviously $1.1 million is a lot of money. It's more than he even started retirement with. So this raises another problem of, what happens if you're starting to go down one of these more optimistic paths where you have more money than you expected. Can you start to make adjustments to your plan? What do I need to do to prevent this scenario, later in life? So for that, I like to use a slightly different strategy. It's called retirement income guardrails. We use a different tool here, but just want to show you the same exact scenario using a different strategy called guardrails that I'll explain in just a moment. Don't know why Andy is shown as a woman here, but we'll just show you all the same numbers here. So he's got $1 million in those investment accounts, 200 in brokerage, 100,000 in Roth, pre-tax 401k 700,000. He's got his home, bank accounts, etc. Same expenses, all the same numbers here. It does show that he's 61 because that's how old he'll be at the end of this year. So using all these inputs, we can create what's called a retirement income guardrails strategy for Andy. And that's basically saying that if your portfolio is doing a lot better than expected throughout retirement, you can safely increase your withdrawal amount each year. But on the contrary, if you do experience one of those declines where it might cause you to go down one of these other paths, that we mentioned earlier, you can make a slight adjustment in your spending and sort of, preserve your portfolio and reduce those odds of running out of money. But what I really like and what clients like about retirement income guardrails is that there's these clear-cut guidelines for when you can make those adjustments to, find the balance between not running out of money, but also not dying a millionaire and having any sort of regret later in life that you didn't spend more money in the early years and, go on more vacations, whatever it might be. So if you haven't seen any of my videos on guardrails before, I'll just show you a little bit more detail about how it works. We have Andy's current balances over here and all of his investment accounts, and then the upper and lower guardrails. So what this is saying is if you have a couple strong years in the market, even while you're withdrawing money and your portfolio balance increases to $1.07 million, you can safely increase your withdrawal rate by a few $100s per month and not run the chance of running out of money. And then on the downside, obviously when the markets get volatile, if you reach a lower guardrail, that would be about $700,000 in his situation. You would have to cut back spending just a little bit to, again, preserve your portfolio and reduce your odds of running out of money. So it's a really cool way to visualize, when those adjustments need to be made. So the main thing I wanted to show you this tool to, compare to the other projections that we saw here where Andy reached the end of his life with $1.1 million is to show you the impact of, reaching those upper guardrails, which is likely based on historical data that your portfolio will continue to grow over, a 10, 20-year time period. We can see exactly how much more spending that leads to by increasing your spending as you hit those upper guardrails. So if we look at the sort of legacy, which is the ending amount at the end of Andy's life, again at age 92, the median scenario in this strategy is just $418,000 that he will have left at the end of his life because he was able to spend more of that money between, again, 60 and 92. So compared to the $1.1 million, a strategy like this would allow Andy to spend almost $700,000 more over his lifetime. So that's a lot more, obviously more trips, more charitable giving, whatever it might be, spending money on grandkids. I find that most people would much rather, again, spend more of their money while they can than, reach the end of their life a millionaire. So obviously everyone's retirement situation is going to be a little bit different. We use a single person today. A lot of people are married. A lot of people have different balances and they're allocated and invested differently. But hopefully this gave you a little bit of insight into how long $1 million would last if you plan to retire around age 60. And some of your other numbers match Andy's. For all the DIY investors out there, the tool that I used at the end is called Income Lab. Unfortunately, it's not available to retail investors at the moment, but I hope that they do come out with a version here in the future because I do really believe that it'll help a lot of people get more out of their retirement savings. And finally, if you are someone considering working with a financial advisor to plan out your retirement, I would love the opportunity to speak with you. There's a link in the description below this video where you can set up a free introductory call. Think of it like an interview where you can ask us a few questions about what it would look like to work together, and we'd be happy to build out a free plan to show you that. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel for any future videos, and we will see you in the next one.